I'm good. I'm ready.
All right, great. I just pushed record. We are on. Everybody, we're talking network TV with Anna.
Hi, everyone. All right.
Sorry.
So I guess I should introduce myself. Should I start with that? My name is Anna Henry. I've been in the entertainment industry and business for a very, very long time, more than 15 years. I actually started out in the kids business at a couple of production companies, and then I was at Nickelodeon for a long time. I was involved in developing and producing a show that's sort of become a cult hit, and this will give you an idea of how long I've been in the business, called Invader Zim. And there might be a few fans out there. And then I switched over to the primetime side, and I worked at two different networks at CBS in development and at ABC in programming. And I've done a lot of work with production companies in between. And then for about 6 years, I was working with a boutique management and production company, developing projects and managing a slate of writers. And now I have my own consulting business, and I'm managing a few clients on my own, and I'm independently producing some things. So that's what I'm up to right now. And I actually have a cool PowerPoint, so I am going to see if this will work here to do this. Okay. There we go. So I'm kind of trying to see if I can minimize some of these screens. Okay, so let's get going. I wanted to talk about writing for network television. And I know that a lot of you have heard that network TV is dead, but don't call them more just yet, because it's not really dead, it's just changing. And people have been saying that one type of media is going to kill other types of media forever. TV was supposed to kill radio and the movies, and that hasn't happened. And the internet was supposed to kill the failing New York Times, and that hasn't happened either. And streaming is supposed to kill broadcast, and a lot of people like me are dubious that that's going to happen. Broadcast networks are different from cable and streaming in sort of three big ways. They have a very broad reach. They basically reach virtually every household with a television in America. They work on a really big scale because of that, all across the country. And because of that, they have a big megaphone, so they can have a huge cultural impact. But it is changing. A lot of the networks are now counting on multi-platform viewing, really all of them. So delayed viewing means that overnight ratings, the ratings of how many people watch the show live, are kind of obsolete, but the networks are not. Even the least watched network shows during premiere week end up with bigger audiences than almost anything on cable. And then added to that are the ratings that you see, the +3, meaning 3 days of delayed viewing, and then +7 to 7 days of delayed viewing. As an example, NBC can be watched on 14 different platforms, including their own website, Hulu, Chromecast, and other ways. And this is an example from last year, but it's actually a really good one. So the This Is Us pilot was viewed by 32 million people, which is just extraordinary when you think about it. But 52% watched after the premiere aired, and about 33% of the revenue was coming from digital sources into the network. So is anyone still watching network TV? Obviously, yes. And I love this. Katz Media surveyed adults who do subscribe, most of whom do subscribe to a streaming service, and asked them which Emmy-nominated series they have heard of and they have watched. And you can see, like, on these statistics, but one of the incredible things is that 34% have watched the few Emmy-nominated series that are on broadcast. Only 18% have watched those series that are on cable, and only 11% that are on streaming. So it's really a stark contrast when you see that 76% of survey respondents have never even heard of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which is truly an amazing show. But only 18% have never heard of This Is Us, and 40% have actually watched the show. The only big exception that you can see at the bottom of this is Game of Thrones, which is, a big outlier where the vast majority of people have at least heard of the show, and 31% of respondents have actually watched it, which is pretty incredible. So broadcast networks have kind of a complicated business model. They are corporate entities, obviously. They're in the business of making money. Many are vertically integrated with studios, so they own a studio, which means that they kind of own both ends of the business. They kind of make money twice, which is a little sleight of hand. Basically, advertisers buy airtime, but that is now less than half the revenue that the networks actually get. The affiliates, your local stations, pay for the programs as well. And then the networks pay a license fee to the studios who actually finance the show, who actually put up the money to produce the show. So they make it back through those license fees. But then, like I said, the advertisers, the ad support is actually no longer the majority of that revenue. There are two big revenue streams outside of that. One is international distribution, which you should be aware of, because that means how well your show would do internationally is a big make or break for networks to buy it and pick it up. And then streaming rights, how well is it going to do when it streams on Hulu or Netflix or any number of other platforms. So some of the reasons to be interested in network TV is they have significant money to put up for a show that they can air for multiple seasons and stream or what's called strip repeat for additional revenue. They pay big dividends in the form of residuals. They have to compete for talent. They actually sign what's called talent holding deals, meaning contracts with actors and also writers, basically asking them to work with them exclusively or to work with them primarily, and that strongly influences who they buy from and what actors they want in their shows. These shows typically have big writers' rooms, so there's lots of opportunities for staffing. And the studios use their diversity programs to funnel new talent into those rooms. So if you graduate from the Disney ABC writing program, they're going to be putting you on an ABC show or on a freeform show. So it's good to be aware of the kinds of shows that you're going to have as your first job. They have a huge volume of development. Approximately more than 100 drama and comedy projects are bought per season. About 20 or more go to pilot, and about 10 of those go to series. So you can see that while sort of your odds of actually getting a series on the air are small, your chances of selling a project are just as good, if not better, than in cable. The networks develop on a kind of cycle which has become really fluid in the last few years, but it still exists. In spite of people swearing that they're going to change it, and in spite of the fact that there are outliers, this is more or less the development cycle. August through October, and now getting into November even, the networks buy pitches. From October through January, they develop those scripts. In mid-January, they pick up or select the pilots that they want to make. And then from January through April, they produce those pilots. And this has been a bone of contention a lot, because this means that all of the actors in particular and talent are sort of, crammed into that period of time. And it becomes very tight, very competitive for talent. In May, the networks announced their series pickups. And in mid-May, they have what's called the upfronts in New York, where they announce those shows and basically host a giant party for the advertisers to showcase what they've picked up so that the advertisers can see what they, what is available for them to purchase airtime on. And usually writers are staffed right around in that window. They start staffing. Some shows start meeting with people before they're even picked up. Some showrunners are superstitious and don't want to have any meetings until they get the pickup. I'm serious about that being like a superstitious thing. And they'll start, meeting with people right away. And by, June, these writers' rooms are really trying to be up and running. So most people are hired pretty quickly in that time. So as far as who still watches the network shows and why, here's the thing: TV is just like food. And once you really think about this, it's going to blow your mind. Just like food, it is a consumable good, meaning that we require it all the time, steadily. It's not like we keep it for years and years. We kind of have a steady diet of it, and we consume a huge variety and very frequently, just a huge quantity. Almost nobody likes just one kind, and often we lie about what we consume, which is really very true. So we have some appetite for high-end things and some appetite for low-end things, and fancy restaurants don't put diners out of business because it caters to a different clientele, or it caters to the same clientele but at different times. And so if you can think about shows, like some shows are like a burger or a pizza, and other shows are like a beautiful composed salad at a 4-star restaurant, and some things are good for you and some things are not good for you, and and nevertheless we consume all sorts of things. And if you think of some network shows as pizza, well, a lot of us really like pizza and eat pizza. So when you're developing a show for network, you really want to think about programming. And I've had a chance to work in network programming, and it was an invaluable experience. You want to think about the network's identity, their brand, and therefore what their needs might be, what is on the air and what is about to go off the air, what has recently succeeded or failed, holes in the schedule where you see that they really need a show like this to pair with another show or go after another show. And then what is on the competing network for this audience? How could, ABC capture an audience on, say, Wednesday night that is right now overwhelmingly going to Fox, for example? So before you spend months and months working on a script, if you don't have a manager to do this for you, do it for yourself. Think about what is selling these days. Do ideas like yours sell? What similar shows have been on the air in the last 5 to 8 years? So you may want to steer away from trying to do something that's identical. And then what has been announced as being in development? So follow that on Deadline, which is free. Just go on the website. Is someone working on something in this arena, in this general area, on a reasonably similar show? Sometimes writers get really upset that somebody else is making a show that's very similar to what they have been trying to work on. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because then that can be a great sample for shows like that. In other words, it can show that you can write for a show like that, which can potentially get you a job. So really, really briefly, just to talk about the network identities, and you can do way more research on this yourself. ABC is, the home of wish fulfillment, empowerment kinds of shows. They're very inclusive. They do a lot of diversity programming. It's very bright, soapy. They do a lot of family type programming, including things about adult siblings and aging parents, single parents. Their appeal is middle America. It's supposed to be America's broadcast network is the whole tagline. So they have a lot of shows with sort of everyday heroes. The network is mostly female-centric, but obviously they want to have some male appeal. They have light dramas, humor, emotion. CBS is the home of all procedurals of all stripes. They have character-driven ones, they have closed-ended ones, the case of the week ones. They have a little bit of an older audience, but then they also have multi-camera comedies. They're really good at what they do, so they're reluctant to completely change it. They won't take sort of big risks and buy things that are completely outside their brand. The CW's audience is sort of 20 to 40-year-old, 20 to 40, because teens want to watch what 20-somethings watch. They obviously have a lot of like comic book and sci-fi based shows with some very grounded characters. They don't do any half-hour programming, so their 1-hour comedic programming are dramedies. They do a lot of soapy programming. They really try to keep even male-female audiences, but the storylines have to feel adult and the characters have to be in their late 20s, not younger. Fox has a younger demo, a lot more minority audiences. Their shows a lot of times have more action, they're more muscular, although not all of them, obviously. The Fox character, as they call it, is darker, flawed. They also really like shows that are more flashy, music, dance. This is where Empire is, then they have emotional procedurals with sort of relatable characters. They also have some animated family comedies, the only network that does really animation, and some workplace comedies as well. And then NBC is the most amorphous of them all, that a lot of people have a hard time figuring out what they do. It's, the tagline used to be must-see TV, and they're sort of trying to get back to that. They have big franchises, Law and Order, etc., which means that they can take some really big swings across the board, which is what they did with This Is Us. And they're very creator driven, and their comedies are sort of more of an edge. But it's a great place to kind of think about doing something really different, because they actually can and they will. Network shows really fall into a number of different genres, meaning this is such a weird word, genre, because it means type of show in terms of the, kind of think about it like the type of restaurant that you're going to. But then there's another way that this word is used, and genre also means, when we talk about like a genre show, we mean sci-fi, supernatural, fantasy. So you're going to see this word thrown around in two different contexts, and it gets super confusing. So some of the drama genres, and you will see that a lot of shows actually fall somewhere in between, like they do more than one. There are your serialized crime shows, serialized meaning it's an ongoing storyline. There may be closed-ended stories too, but there's a big arc to the show. There are true crime shows like the Menendez Brothers. There are serialized thriller or political shows. Again, an ongoing storyline with either some kind of political overtones or just really sort of exciting, thriller is kind of self-explanatory. Every so often we'll see a horror show. A lot of the networks are looking for more network horror. That's kind of a great little niche to try to slide into. Genre, like I was just talking about, sci-fi, supernatural, fantasy. There are tons and tons of these shows. It's the most popular thing right now. Some of the networks are getting sick of it. They just have too many of these. Action adventure, MacGyver, Magnum PI. Some of these are a little bit lighter, even like Magnum PI. There are military shows. They're few and far between. They haven't been super successful lately. It's a tough subject. There are lots of dramedies. These are 1-hour comedic shows, like Jane the Virgin or The Orville. Soaps, obviously, everybody knows about those. Then you have some family and relationship dramas like This Is Us. And then you have what we call procedurals. And those are your case of the week shows. And there's 3 different distinct types. There's the cop detective, but I'm going to fold into that like firefighters also, and FBI, and all of those kinds of things. Sorry. Then there's of course legal. And I know that there's some crossover in between those two, obviously, with like SVU. And then there's the medical, which is a very popular, very, very successful genre that in dramas for networks. And then on the comedy side, there are far fewer. There are workplace comedies, obviously. They take place in an office environment. These first two actually are like almost all of them fall into one of these first two. The other one is family comedies, and there are tons and tons and tons of them. Then once in a while you have ones that are really about friends or couples, and sometimes these are hard to distinguish because it's really, you know, whether they're a little bit more about dating or a little bit more about a circle of friends, you know, determines what you, where you might put it, but really they're, you know, there's a lot of overlap there. And then there are those animated comedies, and these of course fall into one of the others because The Simpsons is obviously a family comedy, right? And so forth. And once in a while you have a show that's a little bit of an outlier. And this is where like NBC will take a big swing once in a while, or Fox. So there was, for example, Gallivant, which is, you know, not animated, but kind of should be. It doesn't really fall into any of the other categories, and it's fantasy, so it really kind of falls into this bucket. So everybody thinks, this is one of the biggest points that I want to make. People think that that a project or a script is network, or rather is cable or streaming, because it has obscenity or indecency or profanity in it, right? If you want to show somebody naked or somebody having sex, or you have a lot of F-bombs in there, that means it's automatically cable, right? No, that is not at all the case. That's not the point. Sex and profanity don't make a show great, and lack of sex and profanity don't make a show bad. And that is not really the line by which anybody goes. What we go by, the restrictions, are based on two factors, on brand and on audience. So a network show has broad appeal across the country, bridging gaps in age, gender, income, race, religion, political ideology, kind of everything. The idea is to have the key word in broadcast is broad, right? As opposed to cable and streaming shows that are narrow, that are niche, that are not supposed to appeal to everybody. They're supposed to appeal to one small slice of the audience. So, and there's sort of a threshold where something becomes suitable for cable or streaming because it is for an audience that is more niche or fits the brand of a cable or streaming network because of the type of content, because of the way that the content is handled. It has a level of sophistication that could only appeal to a slice of the audience, or a particular subject matter that wouldn't appeal across the board to everybody. It's really those kinds of things that we look at, or a lot of times a subject matter that you really couldn't talk about on a network show because it would alienate too many kinds of people. There are certain topics that are sort of taboo based on just the network's business model, that there are advertisers in the mix, right? And that there are affiliates in the mix all across the country. So there are few, when I say taboo, these are topics the networks are reluctant to handle. Even though sometimes there's an exception, they generally try to stay away from these. The entertainment industry, which is a very, very difficult thing to write about, period. The advertising business, for obvious reasons. And then 4 of their biggest types of advertisers that they really would rather not criticize in any way. Big pharma, the auto industry, the beverage industry, and sports. Sports are okay as long as it's not like the dark side of, the seamy side of sports, which is, for example, like where you would get into cable territory, because these networks that have, the big sports franchises are not going to, then it's awkward to be airing something about how horrible the behind the scenes of football is, and then also air the NFL. So when you are coming up with a pitch for a network show, here are some of the things that you want to think about. Obviously, you need a log line, and really quickly, we could talk about log lines all day long, but you should know that a log line is not a plot summary, but a sales tool. It has to give an idea of the type of show, although there are sometimes a mix of show types. Stay away from, particularly for network, ones where if you're checking off like 4 or 5 of those genres, it's too many. Now you have the kitchen sink phenomenon, where you've got everything in there. You have to generate some interest in the protagonist, indicate the world of the show, and use some clear, compelling language. You will need to come up with the world of the show, the setting in place and time, and why do we want to watch a show about that world? And most importantly, the why you, why now? So why are you the right person to tell this story? What is your expertise or experience that led you to this? And saying because I thought of this idea and I thought it was cool is not the right answer. And then why now? Why would people want to watch the show at this moment in time? And this is particularly important for network, although it's important for cable and streaming as well. But keep in mind the networks are wondering, why will millions of people want to watch this year as opposed to, last year or 10 years from now? They say in real estate, it's location, location, location. In TV writing, it's character, character, character. Strong, unique characters can sell a script or a show with a well-worn concept, such as yet another rich family soap or buddy cop show. Generic, underdeveloped characters can make an intriguing concept feels like it lacks sufficiently deft execution, or it's just sort of generic. And with network TV falling into these well-trodden categories, those sparkling, unique characters are even more important. And then people ask, do all your characters have to be likable? And they don't, not even for network. There's sort of a difference between relatable characters and likable characters. You're asking the audience to invite these people into their living rooms week after week for literally from September until May. Not just binge viewing for one weekend, but, to live with them basically in their homes. So the characters on the best shows become like family to the viewers, and you don't like all of your family members, but you feel like you know them, or you feel like you're interested in them. You feel like you can, the audience has to be able to relate to the characters, even if they don't like the characters. So you have to know what makes each of your characters distinct, what their dynamics are, how they relate to each other. Obviously, you have to know about triangles, rivals, love interests, all those kinds of things before you start writing. And then you have to think about what is the series going to be like. There are 2 different types of pilots, particularly for network, that we see a lot. A premise pilot and then a typical episode pilot. The typical episode is obviously a pilot that is pretty much, this is what an episode of the show will be like. A premise pilot spends most of the time of the pilot setting up the conflict, setting up the show. Especially this is a way to get into a serialized show where, it's the beginning of the story. And what really the show is about becomes clear at the end of that, at the end of the pilot. You want to think about, in terms of the series, some of the character conflicts that are going to propel your show forward, and versus some of the closed-ended stories. So if you have a procedural where there's a case of the week, are there hundreds of these that you could do? And then what would a typical episode look like? And where do you want to go with the show? Some potential storylines, character arcs, entanglements, all those kinds of things. This is what you want to work out before you even really start writing. partly because you have to have a strong story engine, and this is true for all pilots. You have to have an inherent unresolvable conflict that can propel the show and carry it through multiple seasons. Something that can't be resolved quickly, but will take a long time and get more and more and more complicated. This could be anything from an unconventional family dynamic to, that should be lawyers, to cops and lawyers who share the same goal but use very different methods, those kinds of things. And that leads you to what is at risk for our characters, what are the stakes. And if you have a strong story engine, then your series will have legs, meaning someplace to go. And when we talk about a show that doesn't have legs, it means that the pilot is great, the first 2 episodes are great, but at some point very soon we can see that the show has just nowhere to go. We're just going to get sort of tired of it. Whenever you have a show idea that's a quest, meaning the main character is looking for something, or wants revenge against a particular person, when they have a specific goal in mind that they're seeking to achieve, that's a feature, really, or a mini series. An ongoing series, particularly for a network show, has to have character arcs, has to have a long arc, a long way to go. Because you're trying to go for 100 episodes, right? Not for 6 or 8 or 10. You should also think about the tone and style and the big themes of your show. So you want to, in your pilot, establish the tone of the show. What kind of comedy is it going to be for a comedy pilot? Some of the visual style, especially if you have a supernatural or a fantastical project. And then what are some of the broader themes that your show is going to address as undercurrents? Absolutely nobody wants to be lectured. And especially with network shows, keep in mind that people are tuning in for some fun entertainment. They are not interested in being hit over the head. And so you really have to bury these themes. They should be there, but they have to be kind of undercurrents. But you do want to think about what are the what we call meta themes. What is your show really about? Things like what gives us our shared humanity, or can you trust in strangers who try to help you? How do you establish control or equality in a relationship? Navigating divorce and shared decision making, and so forth. Think about some of your favorite shows and try and think about like the underlying themes and how they build those in when you're trying to keep the project really entertaining. So we should talk about something called packaging, which is what the agencies do a lot. But as a writer, you can think about the packaging of your project right away. Attracting a showrunner who will want to work with you, producers, and then talent, actors to your project, that's what packaging is. When we talk about packaging a project, bringing on these people is what we're talking about. Is there a natural home for your project? Producers who make these types of shows. Studios have what are called overall deals or producing deals with showrunners, meaning that showrunner gets money from the studio to develop either primarily for them or exclusively for them, which sometimes means that they have what's called a blind script deal, which means that the studio basically says to the showrunner, develop what you want, we'll buy a script from you. Whatever, it's blind, as in we don't know what it's going to be yet, but we guarantee that we're going to buy a script from you. So they really have a big, incentive to develop. They have to. They literally owe the studio a script. And studios and networks also have, again, these these contracts deals with actors who they need to use in shows, which is basically the same thing. You promise to work for us before anybody else, and in return, we promise to put you in a show. That's actually really, really key for comedy, which is so much reliant on talent, right? And then let's talk for a second about something that is sort of being talked about and very important in the industry right now, all, across the board, cable, streaming, and network as well, which is IP, which is short for intellectual property. Intellectual property is underlying material, meaning a book or article or play or podcast or blog, to be adapted for a show, or for that matter, a foreign show that is being brought to the US. There's just lower risk for the studio if there's an existing audience for the project. It also provides proof of your expertise in telling the story. Only you can tell the story because you have something that nobody else has, which is access to this property, or maybe you wrote the book and then you have really a unique expertise on it. So keep a lookout for interesting stories that you could use as an IP for your project. Your project is a lot more marketable if it is even loosely based on a magazine article or a podcast or something like that. Or if you have, this is a very interesting kind of secret trick. You already have a project that you're working on. Maybe you've even written a pilot script. Work backwards. Find a book or an article that bolsters your expertise about your existing project, and then use that as an IP. You see what I mean? Like basically say, well, it's loosely based on this, when in fact you created something and then maybe tweaked it based on the information that you found somewhere. So let's talk about writing a network pilot. First of all, length. Keep in mind that the first thing that a producer, a manager, a studio, or network executive, and I'd be most of those, does when they see your script is to flip to the end to see how long it is. I still do that in all my consulting. I'm telling you, I get a script and the very first thing I do is flip to the end to see how long it is. If you are way too long, you've already turned people off. Network lengths are not flexible. Commercial breaks still pay the bills, and the show has to fit into its allotted time slot. For one thing, keep in mind that the network is selling the show to a local affiliate, a local station, and the local station has its own ads, right? That, your mattress discounters and all that kind of stuff. And those trump they go over top of what the network is giving them on their feed, basically. So the reason these lengths are not flexible is because your show will literally be cut off if it exceeds the allotted time at any given moment. So these shows are cut very, very, very precisely to time, and you can do yourself a favor and be mindful of that. By the way, neither are network production schedules. We are putting something on the air next Tuesday at 10 p.m., your show, another show, something is airing then, which is why network shows have big staffs, and usually when they ask for more writers, they get them, because the one thing they absolutely positively cannot do is get behind schedule. So these are your traditional lengths. There's a tiny bit of leeway as things get moved around and cut and added, but your 1 hour ideal page range is 50, 60, 65. 65 is really long. And I'm just gonna, leave this up for a second, but usually you have 5 acts, and sometimes you have a teaser, sometimes you don't. That's optional. So you have somewhat of a breakdown here of how long your acts are. And then for a 30-minute single camera ideal, you're looking at about 36 pages. That's pretty tight. Can't really go over that. And if you're much under that, you're going to be short. So that's your, you can have a cold open, but you don't have to. And you can have a tag, but you don't have to have that either. So you really just need your 3 acts. And then here's your multicam, which is a different format. Here you're looking at about 51 pages. These are written double-spaced, which is why they're obviously so much longer. And here you really need to have a cold open. And usually actually there is a tag, which is kind of like part of Act 3, but usually it's super short. So that's these are your lengths. So very important are act breaks, which you may not see in a cable or streaming pilot, but you must have them for network. The act breaks are not, they should not fall at the end of a scene or sequence. Most writers make this mistake. Their act break falls at the very nice natural end of something. The act break should really be in the middle of the action. It should really leave us hanging so that we want to come back after the commercial break, right? It can be on a turning point that serves as the beginning of something new. But the idea is really not to make them feel like a part of the story is over, but to bring them back after the commercial break. If you feel like your act break is the natural end of a sequence, it's in the wrong place. As you're writing your pilot, in terms of the plot, you have a big task. You have to set up anywhere from 2 to 6 main characters, the world they inhabit, at least one main plot line with an inciting incident, complications, a climax, and resolution, plus give us an idea what the rest of the show will be about, right? So you have time for an A plot, and usually a B plot, and maybe a really small C plot in a drama. You do not have time for what many writers try to shoehorn in there, which is a D, E, F, etc. plot. Keep it simple. Pilots are complicated enough and layered enough. Try to keep it clean and simple, particularly for network. So in terms of your plot, the way that it needs to lay out is that you have to start in Act 1 with an inciting incident. How is today different from yesterday? Why is your pilot starting at this particular time in the characters' lives? So, and this is really your launch point. In Act 1, occasionally, if there's a long teaser, then in the teaser, sometimes this can be a new guy who comes in, or an announcement that's made, or a big move. Those are some typical launch points. Then you have complications. The plot lines can progress linearly or non-linearly. In a linear plot, you can't leave the characters in one plot line and then have them still be in the exact same place as before when you return to them, while the other plot lines have moved forward. People can't be frozen in time. You can set up a case of the week or set up serialized plot lines, although many shows have both, right? Even if you have a police procedural, the cops have your lead characters have personal lives and personal stories. You want to build increasing layers and complexity, making sure every character kind of has a place in that puzzle, and build increasing stakes for each character. Then you have your climax. Everything in the episode comes to a head, both in terms of the character conflicts and plot lines. And then a resolution, which is where a pilot is completely different from a movie. At the end of your pilot, a bomb has to go off, not necessarily a literal one, that launches each of the storylines and the series as a whole. Even if the case of the week wraps up, something needs to happen that breaks things open for the future, that tells us what to expect in future episodes. If your pilot is completely closed-ended, it simply won't launch. You have to sort of kick the engine into high gear in that final act and propel the series rather than winding it down. That doesn't mean ending it on a cliffhanger necessarily. Most pilots don't end on a cliffhanger, but it really means that you want to hit the accelerator at the end rather than try to sort of wrap things up. Network scripts are notoriously or famously dense, meaning that their scenes just, do so much in any given scene. There's just not a wasted word. A lot of cable and streaming pilots can move a little bit more slowly. Network pilots just blaze through because these audiences really want to have that pace be kept up. So you want to show rather than tell whenever possible. It's obviously a visual medium. Showing means having the characters finding out important information on screen rather than off screen. Avoid long talking scenes with little movement. This is where cable and streaming are a bit different. There you sometimes have these. You have to make every word count. What are we getting out of each and every scene? And every scene really has to do at least double duty for both plot and character development. If your scene doesn't move the plot forward and doesn't move some of the character development forward, then your scene is not doing everything it needs to. Again, network TV is very fast-paced. There are rises and falls in emotion, in action, in tone. Even sort of shows that seem slower aren't. When you really look at how dense those scenes are, you will see that there's a lot in each and every scene that is communicated. And that's true, by the way, for comedies just as much, for sure, especially when you have like those multicam comedies with a certain number of jokes per page. That's also what I mean. It can't just be jokes. You have to have, you know, all those other things moving along. I see this is one of those common problems. I see a lot of action descriptions that are simply not acceptable, and this is because writers are trying to get a lot in there, but they're running long. And if you can't have things like the police chase them through the streets, or they have a romantic dinner. That's not, you know, that's a whole scene. So you can't just put these in and hope that executives won't notice that you have summarized the scene in, you know, one line. In terms of characters, well-developed characters, even for network, aren't types, they are real people. But network TV characters embody universal themes. Everyone knows someone who is kind of like this. For a series, all your characters need sort of shades of gray and layered backstories so that we can peel them as an onion over multiple seasons and they have room to grow. Your villains or antagonists have to be people that we sort of love to hate, right? We want to keep watching them. Nobody is evil just to be evil. That's actually true for real human beings too. People don't wake up in the morning and say, let me be evil today. That's one of the first lessons that one of my bosses told me when I still worked in the kids business. And we had a lot of sort of, you know, evil cartoon villains that won't take you through 100 episodes. Complete losers are also difficult for a series. We need some reason that the character is interesting, that we want to keep inviting them back. Keep in mind, again, you're asking the audience to live with these people week in and week out, to effectively like have them over for dinner every week for much of the year. That's really a hard sell if your character is a total loser. Your main characters have to be active for us to want to follow them. And it's really follow is a verb. You're trying to like pull the audience with you. And another little common mistake, make sure your characters' ages and generations are realistic. You'd be surprised how many writers simply don't know how to do math. There's sort of two kinds of shows in terms of talent. There are ensemble shows and star vehicles. This is actually particularly true for comedy, although also for drama. Ensemble shows are very popular, especially with serialized, you know, some of these shorter orders where it's like half of a season, and of course in comedies. A short order is 13 episodes without what's called the back nine, which so fall only or spring only or summer only, and this has become really popular in network TV as well. But the idea is that it's a continuing series, so unlike, you know, 13 episodes of, you know, something on Netflix, here it's 13 followed by presumably another and another and another 13 to, you know, however many seasons. But then on the other side of ensemble shows are these star vehicles, again, because of these talent holding deals, where a show that has a star attached is much more likely to succeed. And really on the comedy side, this is a must. Most comedy pilots that are picked up are, unless there's already a star attached whose life story it is or who developed it, who's a producer on it, usually comedies are what's called cast contingent, meaning we will make your pilot provided you can cast it, provided you can attract really good comedians. So one of the, I'm going to talk about a few difficult things. This isn't, screenwriting 101, but just a few things that are really key, particularly to network pilots. One is introducing your characters. You can't have paragraph long character descriptions on page 1, which I've seen multiple times, but physical descriptions are necessary. And you can use, actor types or like a dream cast. Keep in mind that, when I read like the audience, and your audience will have seen multiple promos of the show. So telling your reader what your character looks like is a good idea, because the audience will know that information well in advance. But the audience will not have a sheet with character descriptions or a chart outlining their relationships. That has to be on the page. Name your characters, even supporting cast in dialogue. This is another really common problem. And any recurring character has to have a name unless they're specifically a mystery person. Casting directors can't cast thug number 2. Nobody wants to be thug number 2, especially if they have 3 scenes. Really, dialogue is very important. And this is another issue that I see a lot with scripts, that everybody kind of sounds the same. You have to think about the fact that a 50-year-old Irish mobster from Brooklyn is not going to talk the same as a Latina teen in East LA. And in fact, even if all your characters are Latina teens from East LA, like one of the projects that I've worked on, they're not the same people. A shy girl talks differently from an outgoing one. An AP nerd talks differently from a rocker chick. The truth is, I shouldn't even need to see the dialogue headings that identify which character is speaking in order to read your script. I should just hear their voices in my head as I'm reading, and not even need to see who is speaking. Again, avoid what we call on the nose dialogue, people saying exactly what they mean. Layered characters come out through subtext. And then we talk about the emotional content of a scene. And this is like the case study for this is really This Is Us, which I really love. And, it has a huge success. So it's good to look at that. And the question is, why is that so popular and yet so emotional? And part of the reason is that you can look at this formula. The emotional content of a scene equals the emotion the characters actually display on screen plus the emotion the audience feels. So if the scene, in terms of what's happening, has an emotional content of 100 and the characters display 75, then the audience will only feel 25. And one of the ways that This Is Us succeeds so well is that the emotional content of a scene is 100, but the characters only display 25, which means you are in tears because you are handling the other 75. Take a look at some of those scenes and you'll be surprised that how much this holds true. As you're introducing your characters, the best network pilots introduce characters 2 or 3 at a time in scene after scene, linking one character from one situation and group to the next to establish those relationships, rather than trying to have us meet 20 people all at once, which never works. Introductions are a form of exposition, and exposition is really hard because by its very nature is boring. Until you come to care about a character, you don't care about the character. And particularly your audience who is tired after a long workday turning on the TV, their default position is to not care rather than to be interested. So in spite of a lot of marketing, which is done to get them interested. So you have to generate interest very, very quickly, convey information in a way that feels what we call organic, meaning it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like you're just downloading information really quickly. And there's really two types of exposition that you have to do. One is these character introductions, and then the other is world building. So with the character introductions, you will see one of the things that works really well that a lot of network pilots use is the newcomer, a person who's coming into the situation of your show for the very first time and has to meet everyone and see everything from the same point of view as the audience. There's a reason this is used so much because it works really, really well. And it feels very natural. This is frequently part of the teaser. Our lead finds himself or herself in a very tense or odd or challenging situation that then gets our attention. One of the common mistakes that I do see is characters conveying this kind of expository material by having conversations in which both characters are or should be well aware of all of the information that is being said. And that can feel so awkward. A couple who divorced years ago don't have a conversation about why they split up for no apparent reason. You would need some sort of trigger. They don't just like start expounding for that just so that the audience can get the backstory. And then you have to do what we call world building, setting the scene for the pilot. In your writing, you can use simple descriptions of the place and the milieu, the type of place where your show is taking place. You don't want to have long paragraphs of description without any dialogue to break them up, because your reader will just skim. You really want to look at those paragraphs as communicating with your director. What will we actually see on screen? You really only get a handful of shots to orient us, so what will those shots contain? And the executives are reading this kind of stuff, asking themselves, what kind of budget will your show require? How much of it needs special effects? How many roles will require star power? And then how many standing sets might your comedy have? Things like that. Be honest in your exposition. Disclose upfront what sorts of requirements your show will have. Sometimes writers try to hide that stuff in some way, and it's not useful. You really want to let people know this is what will go into the making of my show. And this next point is one of the things that I see more of than almost anything else as far as problem areas. A lot of writers, a lot of those network genres are, whether they are fantasy or thrillers or even crime shows, suspense is a really big way to generate interest, right? And that's great. But writers want to create a sense of mystery so much that they put very little on the page, which makes the audience confused and frustrated rather than intrigued. So, for example, if you are writing about like an alternate universe, some kind of a genre show, in sci-fi, you're literally setting up new worlds we have never seen. So this kind of exposition is really crucial. If I know what is taking place, if I'm following along, and to some extent why, if I understand what's called the rules of the universe, of what can happen, what cannot happen, and why things are happening, then even if I don't quite understand the details or the backstory of the world, and I think some of the things that happen are highly unusual, I'm still intrigued. But if many interesting things happen, but and maybe you even have a great main character who I would love to follow, but I never really found out anything about the world of the script, so I didn't ever really get what was happening or why it was happening, then I'm just confused or frustrated. There's actually a trick to this. If you, in your script, have a character saying, I'm confused, that means the audience is too. If you have a character saying, I'm bored, that means the audience is too. I was literally just reading a script, and like about 20 pages in, one of the characters says, I'm so confused, I don't understand what's happening. And I put like 3 exclamation points by that. Yep, me too. So you have a couple ways to handle this. One is, of course, for the characters to know more than the audience does and build that mystery and suspense. But sometimes it's a great idea to have the audience know more than the characters do, because then you have anticipation and excitement. In terms of exposition, the most overused things that I and my fellow executives and producers and everybody equally hates are newscasters, unless of course your show takes place in the world of news, or unless the news is saying things that we know not to be true, at which point it's interesting. Chiron, if you're using it as a regular plot device, like there's a few shows that have done it very successfully, most especially Law and Order, not that they really even need the Chiron, you can understand the show fine without ever reading them. Don't use that as a crutch to communicate setting or time period. And narration, which never works unless the narrator is a character who gives contrary or revealing information. And I mean, the best possible example of this, the sort of textbook best example, is Jane the Virgin, far and away, of where it works. We talked a little bit about rules of the universe. It's very important that you communicate to the audience what can and cannot happen on your show. If anything can happen, then there are no stakes. If your show takes place in our world, then we assume that the regular laws of nature apply. Anything else we assume is some kind of dream or fantasy or hallucination. If you have an alternate world, then you have to show us examples of what can and cannot happen. And you have to apply those so that we get some clear and consistent rules. Another aspect of being a writer is doing your homework by doing research. Research your world or you will lose credibility. Authenticity is very, very compelling. Read about and look up the details of your world if it isn't something you've experienced firsthand. If you are looking at another time period, for example, a historical project, what was the mood or feeling of the time period? Specific technology or items that were available or not? What is taking place in the world outside your characters? How do people in a specific profession do their work? What does a specific type of place look like? Those details are what make your pilot stand out. Let's talk for a minute about budget considerations, which we touched on a little bit before. Your typical network, this is not cable now or streaming, network drama pilot budget is usually around roughly $6 million. Your episodes, on the other hand, will be about $4.3 million. Occasionally, these pilots can vary wildly. So the Supergirl pilot was made for $11 million, but that's very unusual for a network pilot. And the show had a great deal of difficulty adjusting down to a significantly lower episodic budget, which is why it ended up moving and all that stuff, right? That was a big part of it. Certain costs can be amortized over the season, and if you're not familiar with that word, it means spread out in the budgets of all of the episodes. So each episode pays a little bit into it, and I'm kind of like having it on layaway. And so think about some of those things. When you are writing, make sure that any expensive sets or builds get multiple uses in your story. And then also keep in mind that much of the budget goes to cast. So if you have an enormous cast, your pilot is very expensive, even if otherwise it would seem pretty reasonable in terms of the rest of the budget. You will, even a lot of minor characters adds up really, really, really fast with the SAG minimums. And then, think about these numbers. The studio is investing a lot of money in your idea. I mean, millions of dollars. So you really have to justify why they will make bank. And that's the thing especially when newer writers are writing pilots and thinking about selling them. You have to really think about the fact that with a drama pilot, you're asking for someone to literally give you $6 million. And by the way, I didn't put comedy in here because that really can vary hugely just because you have these standing set multicams and then single cams. They're sort of roughly half this, but it really, you have a really big, a really big difference. And then also once you have very big stars attached, there are all kinds of complicated budget scenarios worked out when those stars are also producers, and it gets very complicated. As you think about the setting of your pilot, think about certain business side considerations. Many states give tax incentives, which has caused many shows to shoot outside of Los Angeles. LA is trying to compete. A lot of shows shoot in Vancouver, Atlanta, smaller cities. Networks are always looking for shows that can shoot in some of these major cities that are not New York and Los Angeles, or cities where we haven't seen a lot of shows set, even though they're relatively big cities. Think about, does the location play a key role in the script, or can it be flexible? Can your show be shot elsewhere, even if it's written to take place in a certain place? Can you set your show in a place that we haven't seen a lot of other stories being set? And then what specific neighborhoods or types of locations or types of people or extras does your show require to feel authentic? And one of the biggest considerations in the industry right now is diversity. Diversity of voices doesn't only mean diversity of writers, it includes a diverse cast of characters. It's easier to differentiate voices a lot of times when you have a diverse cast of characters. It avoids, diversity means avoiding types and really developing complex characters. The networks are keenly aware that a diverse cast reflects the diverse population of America. Again, keep in mind that you are trying to appeal across the board to everybody. And so we're back to who watches. You really have a broad appeal for networks. And I think maybe that's my very last thing. I used to have a last slide, but I guess I don't. So I will go back to me, and I guess let's take some questions. So let me look at the Q&A here, and let's go back. Okay, so someone is, okay, so Gerald is asking, and forgive me if I totally mispronounced your name, about narration. What about using a super like London Bridge, June 3rd, 1954? So do you really need this? First of all, aren't we seeing London Bridge? And then is there some other way visually that you could communicate that it's 1954? What are people wearing? What kinds of cars are driving down the road? You know, all of what do the buildings look like? Can someone, you know, walk by and say something that would indicate, you know, a throwaway line that really has nothing to do with the plot, but indicates the time period? Do I really need to know it's June 3rd, or will just 1954 suffice? Usually there are ways to go around this, and it's so much more effective than having that. Let's see. Michelle asks, why do I think big pharma is taboo? Have you seen the number of ads for medications on network TV? That's why. So exactly, nobody wants to make those advertisers angry. Big pharma is a very controversial topic in America already. It has been handled on many medical shows now, but it's sort of, and but they are handling it in the context of one particular episode or one storyline rather than building an entire show around that. And I mean, Big Pharma gets made fun of, I still watch Big Bang Theory. I love that show. And Big Pharma is one of their regular targets. But having a whole show set in that world would be tough. Let's see. Sorry, I'm like skipping around here to see. Okay, so Michelle asked what would be the best way to reach out to a programming and development executive in a network who she actually knows personally, who she has worked with on a project. If you truly believe that she would remember you, and you can assume that she will, and if that's the case, I mean, if you have her email address, just email her. That would be really the best way. Is her private email. A lot of people, I always find that reaching out to anybody via Facebook, and that's not just for work, but like in general, it's tricky because a lot of people don't check their Facebook messages, guilty as charged. And so that's, they may not respond, and that's not because they don't want to talk to you. So that would be my answer. If you have her private email, I would really suggest that you do that. Let me see. Okay, Yvonne is Australian. I've never been there, but I would love to go. How much of a disadvantage is this? And is there anything that you can do about it? Well, I don't know that there's anything that you can do about it. But I also don't know that it's a disadvantage. I mean, there's a great TV and film industry in Australia. So, and I know that because a bunch of their shows have come to the US. So, you can definitely, get involved in your local, in making content for the Australian market. And, and some of those shows do come to the US. It's difficult to get involved in the US market while not being here in some ways, particularly because even meetings, virtual meetings or in-person meetings can be difficult to arrange. But you have a fantastic local TV industry to explore. And keep an eye on, one of the things that you can do is keep an eye on what's selling in the US. And then as you are pitching your show to an Australian producer, you can talk about, I think that this would sell here, but I actually think that this will be a great format for us to sell in the US, because I think that they would buy this and then, and remake it for NBC, for example. So that can be a real selling point. One of the selling points that as a producer, I've used a lot for shows, and I talked about this, is international appeal for a show that you're developing for a US network. They have to sell it internationally to make back their money. So what will sell in Europe or what will sell in China, right? It works to reverse too, because things are coming here. So what will sell here? Let's see. Okay, so Greg, I think, oh, this is a great question. If a script is timed at a page a minute, how does the 60-page script leave time for advertisements? That's an excellent question. I love it. Thank you. That is because the script being timed at a page a minute is a feature thing. That is something that that applies to features and not to TV. It doesn't apply to cable or streaming content either. TV is a lot more fast-paced than that, and network is just, really fast-paced. There is no way that a page of script is a minute of screen time. That is just like not the way it goes. So take a look at scripts for network shows, and That said, many of them do air a little bit, a little bit less. Like that 58 is really a nice place to hover. But 60 is really fine, and that will make you a 42-minute show. So that should tell you how much screen time, if you do a little bit of math, one page of script would equal. And actually, you will see that some, if you look at some scripts for some cable shows and streaming shows, you will see that they're shorter. And so then how is it that I have a 50-page script for not a 42-minute show, but a 1-hour show? And that's because they're moving so much slower, right? There's a lot of cinematic shots in there. There can be a lot of different, things that are taking up time. Things are moving slower, and there's maybe silent looks. Look at all those things that are contributing to the length on screen versus what is on the page. Let's see. Gerald also asks, thoughts on one or two genres that are perhaps worth writing now, and thoughts on what network is appropriate for these. Well, wow, that's there's a lot. So I kind of touched on this a little bit, and if you're lucky enough to work with a manager or an agent, they will have something that many of us get called a network needs document. Basically, the agencies have annual meetings with network executives and kind of ask them, so what are you looking for? And then they share that document, but you can create one on your own. So here's what I'm talking about, just as an example. Both Jane the Virgin and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend are going off the air after this year. So what do you think the CW is looking for right now? A show to replace them, right? Because they're very, very popular, but they're ending for a variety of reasons. Jane the Virgin is ending in no small part because Gina Rodriguez would like to do some other thing, which makes sense. So, the network doesn't want to necessarily lose that kind of audience altogether. Versus, I'm just taking one network here, versus, okay, so comic book adaptations are super, super popular, but there's tons of them now. So do you have something that's really different that really hasn't been done? And if you have one that you think would be appropriate for the CW, do you think they're looking for one right now? They have a bunch of them. So that's one of the things that you can look at is, what is going off the air? What has been successful? I don't think it comes as a shock to you that everybody's looking for the next This Is Us. So that's, obvious, right? Everybody's looking for their version of that. Look at some of these trends and you can kind of feel out what are they looking for and what are they not looking for. A network that's just picked up 2 medical shows last year, and both of them have been very successful, is not looking for another one, because there's, they're kind of trying to pull together a menu. It's like a restaurant, and you're trying to put together a balanced menu, right? There's only so many burgers you can have and so many pastas, and then you got to have a little bit of something else. So that's really what you're looking at. Okay, let me. Some of these other questions. Brianna, are you still with us?
Yeah.
So we've got a question here about getting a copy of the PowerPoint. And
yeah.
That's
Michelle, I sent her back this answer already, but I'll tell everyone this was an awesome PowerPoint. I think what people can do is everyone will get a copy of a live recording of this. And so you can have that in perpetuity. So you can use that to take your own notes and everything, rather than you needing to send us the PowerPoint.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. People can use that in the future. They can pause it. You can have that recording forever. So we'll be sending that out within 24 hours, 48 hours, 24, something like that.
And then let's see, what else have I not?
I think you're good.
And there's one more here. Monique says, do you have any advice for a writer to get their work into the right people's hands if the writer doesn't have a manager? This is the single most common question that that I think I've ever gotten for good reasons. You really just have to network, honestly, which means get to know people. And the more people you get to know, then they will, you know, pass your material on to someone else and someone else and someone else. And you can do that kind of networking in writers groups, where your fellow writers will get on a show and then suddenly you know someone on a show. You can do that kind of networking through, you know, through pitch sessions right here with Roadmap Writers, and get your project in front of people who might be interested in it. And there are, you know, a number of other ways that you can really connect with people. Depending on what you do, you can also potentially create your own content, and that's particularly true for comedy. If you write comedy, please think about whether you have access to actors, which is really the biggest sort of expense of a comedy, and potentially access to a set, and think about shooting your own stuff, which now has become sort of very, very easy to do. And then you can make webisodes and put them up online and get a following and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways to get noticed. But really, the only way to, you know, to get your work into people's hands is to get to know them and get to know their work, and have them get to know you through little bit by little bit, working one person at a time to the next, to the next, to the next. I hope that sort of answers your question. Okay.
Awesome. Well, if that's all the questions, that was really, really great. Thank you for being so thorough.
Absolutely. I think, I don't know if there are no other questions, I will leave you to say, keep writing, and write, please, not just for cable and streaming, but also really think about writing for network. It's like the sexy popular thing now is for every pilot to be for Netflix, but not everything is really suitable for Netflix. Not everything should be on Netflix. Not every Netflix show succeeds. In fact, there's some big concerns now about the sheer volume and shows getting lost. And think about all of the opportunities and how these big networks are, you know, in a way, the fact that they are competing so much with the streaming giants now for top talent actually is opening a door for some up and coming writers to really be successful and to start selling shows. So it's one of those things of, you know, Shonda Rhimes goes to Netflix and then all writers say, well, since she's there, I want to be there too. Except maybe the fact that she's not there actually means that you have a better chance of getting in there, because they are looking very much for new, great talent, for people who can come in and deliver fresh voices, authentic ideas, different twists on the same stuff. They're definitely looking for that new type of content. So I will leave you with that. Think about that, and good luck.
Yeah, good luck, everybody. Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a great day,
Have
Anna.
a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.